So today's video was supposed to be about my mom because it's her sobriety date today. But at the time of this recording, DMX is on life support from an apparent overdose. So I felt the need to talk about my experience with overdose, with people I know who have had sobriety, and in reconciling overdose and death. And so will actually not be the first time that my mom got bumped for DMX.
I'm JT. I'm in my mid-30s, have a 10-year media career, and nearly a decade of sobriety. So how did another middle-class kid turn into a blackout drunk and a heroin junkie? More importantly, how did it change, and where do we go from here? This is my story.
So I just want to say off the top, huge fan. DMX's first 3 albums were huge for me as a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, especially his second album, Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood. You guys know how any fans out there know the 1-2 punch of tracks 1 and 2 on that album. It's incomparable. Look, I can't say that his impact and being on life support from an apparent overdose, and God willing he makes it through, has impacted me any more than someone like Tom Petty or Prince or the countless other celebrities, especially people in music. Demi Lovato. We just talked about Demi Lovato last week, who have overdosed, have been hospitalized, and or have died. But it is a fact of life, and it is a fact of addiction, and unfortunately, it's a fact of recovery and sobriety too. So that's sort of my jumping off point for this. There's a lot of stuff we could get into the weeds with on celebrities, people in the music and entertainment business, why they end up overdosing, dying, ending up hospitalized. That's not really what I want to get into today. Today, I want to talk about why, in general, relapse, overdosing, you can't assume that anyone who's overdosed had been sober before they overdosed. We don't know if that's the case with DMX. Can't assume so. It's also, we're not even 100% sure it's because of overdose. It's been reported overdose, heart attack, could be both. But overdose has had, and death through addiction has had a huge impact on my sobriety. And it didn't have a huge impact on my addiction because in my active addiction, I didn't have many experiences with friends or loved ones overdosing and dying. I did have one very pivotal one, and I talked about it very briefly in my story episode. And that was one of my best friends in the world. One of my very, very best friends from growing up was one of my running buddies, my crew. Pretty much all of us are we definitely were in active addiction when we were all running together. And we've either all gotten sober or are still going down that spiral. And this one had a profound impact on me because this friend, and I won't mention his name, but he was just the guy that lit up the room. I mean, he won, Homecoming King and all that stuff a million times. He was everybody's favorite person. Never could tell the truth to save his life, but just the most charming person you've ever met in your life. And you've probably heard a lot of these stories or experienced stories like this where the people who seem to fall the hardest are often the ones that seem to have everything going for them. And this guy had after high school, and we know how things can start crumbling down for many people when you start making that transition into adult life. He had already had an overdose. He had already had a significant overdose to where doctors told him, you cannot ever put anything like this, any sort of opiate or barbiturate into your bloodstream again. I think they even told him you probably shouldn't even smoke. And of course, he didn't follow those rules, and before we know it, he is in intensive care. He's on life support for an overdose, and all the messages we were getting as his dear friend group were, he's not going to make it. And I remember vividly, I was in Fort Worth, I was in college, I was out with friends one night, and I got that phone call from one of our friends in the friend group, and he said, "Hey, man, it's time. Like, you need to come back, because if you want to see him before he goes, it's going to have to be within the next 24 hours." And I just remember breaking down in my bathroom at the house I was living in and just crying for an hour. I mean, I cried and I cried and I cried, and I took a shower and I cried. And when I woke up in the morning to get ready to go back to Richardson to see him, I cried. And I was at a point where I was certainly in active addiction, but I hadn't crossed the threshold yet. And again, I talked about this being the moment where I crossed the threshold. I was not yet at that point where I viewed myself, or anyone could really honestly look at me and go, he's out of control. He's definitely an alcoholic addict. He's going to either have to get sober or end up in jail or dead. So it had a significant impact on me because I couldn't yet see myself on that side of the fence yet. I was just losing a friend. I wouldn't want anyone to have to see a friend like that. It was almost as painful as having to watch my mom go, was seeing my friend lifeless on life support. How that story ended up, he survived. He's still with us today. Because I wasn't on the other side of the fence yet, that actually happened to be the first night that I first did a hardcore opiate. It was OxyContin. And that was when I crossed the threshold, as I talked about in my story video. That is where I couldn't recognize yet, until I did it, that I was doing the very thing that had my friend end up in this position. And I did know where it could lead me, and I did it anyway. So before I did the OxyContin that night, I was on this side of the fence. After I did it that night, I was on the other side of the fence, because I go, okay, I know what I'm walking into, and I know how this could end up. And sure enough, that's how it ended up. But the reason it had an even more profound effect on me is because when he survived, I remember making the trip to go with all my friends to go see him at his home after he had gotten out of the hospital. And before I even got there, one of my friends called me and said, he's already on drugs again. And I had to make a tough call at that point and had said, you know what, I already said my goodbyes to him. I don't know if I can be his friend anymore. And looking back, I wish I'd handled it differently. It had a profound effect on me, and it was before sobriety, or before really even dealing with my addictions in any sort of serious way. So then we fast forward to being sober. And sadly, since I've been sober, I have lost many, many friends to overdose and to death. And in fact, I don't have any friends who have overdosed and survived since then. All of them have overdosed and died. And the real kicker, the real hard part, and the impetus for this episode is almost all of those friends were in my recovery group when they overdosed and died. So they not only were addicts and overdose and didn't make it, they had seen the light. They had experienced sobriety. Some of them even had some long-term sobriety, and they still didn't make it. And that's really hard. And there've been a couple of them friends from the meetings, recovery groups. One of them was not. And I don't have much connection with his family or anything like that, but it still hurts and it's sad to see. In fact, I didn't even know that he was down that path, but we were down that path when we were in high school. He was the first person I ever did cocaine with. And so it's not very surprising. Look, plenty of people. In fact, I would imagine the majority of people who dabble into drugs and alcohol in high school are probably going to end up okay. But when you're 15, 16 years old and you only got a handful of friends who are seeking cocaine, probably going to end up in the same place. I mean, it just adds up. And I'm just lucky that I've ended up where I am today. I had to go through a lot of crap to get here, but we went down the same path. So it should be no surprise. And I say this just to look out for those warning signs. There's a reason when teenagers get involved in hardcore drugs that parents get freaked out, because if you have that hard drug seeking behavior that early in life, you're probably going to have it as you move into adulthood. And that's freaking scary. The one that's impacted me the most is my friend Frank. And you may have seen me post about Frank on Instagram or talk about him. He's had a profound impact, not just on my life, but on lives of people all over the world, all over the state of Texas, certainly all over the DFW area. My friend Frank first came into my life when I was about a year sober. He was new to Dallas. He didn't know a lot of people. He came to me through some of our connections within recovery. And Frank had that same thing that my friend from high school did. He lit up the room when he walked in. He was charming. He was funny. Everyone wanted to be around him. Everyone gravitated towards him. And there's several stories that are really touching that I can't share here because they happened inside the rooms. But he was, and I said this, I guess I won't say where, but I said this in more or less as many words. Frank was so incredible at the parts of recovery that I still struggle with 9 years sober. Service work, helping others, being there for others. In fact, he was going to make it his life. He was studying social work for a degree. But I mean, this guy, like, his entire schedule was based around working with the homeless. I can't tell you how many homeless shelters I went into with him to carry the message of recovery. And I wouldn't have done it if he didn't invite me and get me to go do it. But he was doing that stuff every single day. And some people had an experience with him that had nothing to do with recovery. They were just people who gravitated towards helping the others, helping the homeless, helping the needy. And they had the same experience that me and all my recovery friends had with him. But we were very close. And we shared things. We had a group of guys, small group of guys all around the same age, all who got sober around the same time. And for a few years there, we were all very, very close. You know, I knew that Frank had relapsed a couple times and he struggled with it. But man, that guy tried so hard. Like, he really, and he felt it. He felt the pain when he failed. And he really wanted to make it. He knew that sobriety was the path for him, but he kept slipping up. And then sadly, one day we all get the news that he had overdosed and he didn't make it. And this one impacted me not just because he was a very close friend and not just because he was actively trying to stay sober. It wasn't like he was just out there and no one could get him, or he went to a meeting one time, or he went to rehab and then, came out and didn't really do the stuff. He was really trying. It wasn't just that. He was actively doing the things that I don't even do that good a job of. And I've had 9 years with no relapse. And that was so hard for me to reconcile. Why does this guy, the thing that I said was, Frank, the way that he works his recovery is how I would work my recovery if I was doing everything I needed to be doing. Meaning, this guy was a guy who struggled and who had less time than me, and I even had to help when he first came in, and I was looking up to him because of everything he did that I knew, I need to be doing that. I need to be doing that. I need to be going and helping others and going to the homeless shelter and going to the soup kitchens, and I need to be doing, not just doing it, but doing more of it and making it as much a part of my life as this guy did. So it wasn't just that he was trying and he was in and he had some slips. It was that he was doing all the stuff that I can't even do 90% of today. And it's not that I can't do it. It's just that I haven't budgeted my time right to be as involved with those things as I know I should. So how is it that someone who had the heart of gold, who had everything going for them, who everyone wanted to be around, who wasn't seeking money or attention like I was in my job, still am in my job. There's no way around that. Who was only seeking to better himself and to help others. How is it that he had to die and I haven't even relapsed? And this was very difficult for me. And it was very difficult for others in my friend group. Others in my friend group who don't have as much sobriety as I do, who struggle more than I do, and they felt the same way. Why should this guy go? You know, why me get to stay and get to have this great life? And he was trying and trying harder than me in a lot of ways. And that was really hard for all of us to get past, this overdose thing of like, we can get into the why it happens, and it happens especially for people who have had some sobriety. That's because people who've had time away from the drugs go back to it and go right back to or close to the amount they were doing when they were everyday users. There's a lot of reasons. But the thing that was just so hard for me for so long is, why him? I don't do everything right. I don't do everything close to right. I don't do everything as close to as well as he did. And I'm still standing. And it took a long time. I sought answers for years on this subject while feeling the pain of his loss. And I talked to my mom about it. And I talked to my sponsor about it. And I talked to my friends about it. And finally, someone said something to me that really stuck. And they said, the hard, honest truth is that when people relapse or people overdose in these situations where they have been in the program and they have been trying to do the right thing, they're doing all these amazing things. What was one of the things that I wasn't thinking about? I was focusing on all the great things that they were doing. This is a very hard truth. Sometimes those people, and this is the only explanation that I could wrap my head around, are not 100% secure in that they are an alcoholic and an addict. And a light bulb just went off in my head, and I go, man, and you've heard me talk about this before. I don't ever wonder about that. I know 100%. If I could go to 110, 120, 150, 1,000%, I know I'm an alcoholic and addict, and I know I can't have anything. I can't have a drink. I can't have a drug. I can't have a smoke, or else I could end up dead. I could end up losing all this great stuff I have. And I live in that place, and not all of it is from my own doing. A lot of times in recovery, you have to really fight to keep that mindset. You have to fight by doing the things, stuff for others, going to the soup kitchens, going to help the homeless. I've been very fortunate that my higher power has blessed me with that 24/7. I wake up with it. I go to bed with it. I sleep with it. I know I can't cross that line. And some people, no matter the great things that they're doing in recovery or how many times they've gotten back up and gotten back in, it could only come down to that. It could only come down to them not being at that 100%. Because otherwise, why keep going back to it? And there's a lot of reasons that can go into that. There's a lot of genetic, mental disability reasons. Everybody's different. But that's really what it comes down to. And it's really hard to hear, because what you want to hear is the person did all the right things and they made it. And it would have been a lot harder for me to stomach if I had never found that explanation, as moribund as it may be. But that's the bottom line. And that is why and how, that is how overdose has, and losing people to overdose has impacted me so profoundly. And I did make a comment at the beginning about the DMX thing and having to bump my mom for DMX. The comment was that, I can remember vividly sitting with my, not Walkman, CD man. What are they? Discman. With my Discman. Kids at home, look it up on Google. You can probably get one for like $3. And listening to DMX on one of those first 3 albums, and my mom tried to get me to do chores or something downstairs and blowing her off. So this is the second time my mom's been bumped for DMX. So let's get the mail. Okay, all the mail today comes from YouTube because I was actually kind of shocked at how much response we got from the Demi Lovato video. I think some Lovatics got a hold of the video. So I wanted to read some of these YouTube comments. First, Julian Erickson responding to my take on Demi Lovato saying she's California sober, saying now after long time in sobriety, many times relapsing, overdosing very recently, being hospitalized, that she is going to smoke marijuana as part of her recovery. Julian says, I think that this is sometimes a part of the road to full sobriety. There's almost no people who could manage to drink and smoke without falling off the wagon when have a history with drug addiction. The most sketchy part is when you get to the part where you think you have full control of yourself, which most likely you don't. By the way, I'm a Lovatic and I will stand by her if she fails again. However, I think it could be healthy for her to get to fully know herself. I just hope if she slipped that it doesn't go too far. Julian, thank you for commenting. I hear you echoing a lot of things that she said, specifically in the Joe Rogan interview. And I want to just reiterate, I am in full support of whatever she or anyone needs to do or chooses to do to get where they want to be. I'm all behind it. Let me just answer a few of your points here. That it is sometimes a part of the road to full sobriety. I have never seen smoking marijuana be integrated into the road to full sobriety. I don't know any recovery professionals or anyone that I've met with long-term sobriety who would ever recommend that. And again, I'm not chastising. I'm just saying, no, I do not think that sometimes it is part of the road to full recovery. And that there's almost no one who could manage to drink or smoke without falling off the wagon. I think what you're saying there is there's almost no one who would be able to not do it at all. Look, our rate of success in sobriety is not fantastic. I wish it were better, but there are people out there. Yes, there are many people with 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of sobriety without ever drinking or smoking. They do exist. It's possible. It's hard. Doesn't happen often, but it does exist. The most sketchy part is when you get to the part where you think you have full control of yourself. I did want to pinpoint this because I heard Demi say something like this in her Joe Rogan interview, and control is something that, in my experience in recovery, we say we have no control. I have no control over whether I'm going to drink or use. That's all up to my higher power. That's what I believe, and that's what many people in the program believe. And I'll leave that there. Now, for you standing by her, I stand by her too. I do. I'm not judging her decisions. I'd love to see where it goes. I'm happy for there to be other roads of recovery because my way is not the way for everyone. If it's healthy for her to get to fully know herself, same thing. I just hope if she slips that it doesn't go too far. Completely agree. Nobody wants to see her in the hospital again. And certainly we all want her here and making great music and making profound effects on people's lives like you, Julian. So thank you, Julian, for sharing. Thank you for commenting on the YouTube video. Another one from YouTube. This was Chelsea Braun. This is really interesting. Talking about smoking marijuana as part of recovery. She says, personally, it works for me. But for some, it is a gateway to other drugs in the mindset of, if I can find this, I can definitely find that. It's just a change of mindset to, I know I can find that, but I don't need to. Weed is enough. A drink is enough. Chelsea, thank you for your comment. And what I would just say to that is that you are what I call normal. I would love to just be able to have weed or just be able to drink, but I can't, because I know it will lead to other things. And maybe not just drugs and harder drugs or living a, drug addicted lifestyle, but losing all the things I love in my life. I know it will end up that way for me. So what I would just say is that you are what I would call normal. I would make that distinction between you. I would not call you an addict and an alcoholic. Maybe I would not call anyone that unless you identify that as yourself. But that's what I think is the distinction. That's where I see the distinction. And I love that people can be normal. I don't chastise people who could drink or use marijuana. I would love to. I just can't. So thank you so much, Chelsea. Great feedback. So much great feedback from the Demi Lovato video. It's still coming in. I'm really thankful that it struck a nerve and that so many people had things to say. Some of them were mean, but that's okay. We talked it out. I would love for you to comment. What are your thoughts on Overdose? What are your thoughts on losing people? How have you reconciled it? Please reach out. You can DM, you can comment on the video. We'll see you next time. Hey family, if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Share it with someone who you think might benefit from watching this, and feel free to comment below. Love.